He had it all: money, power, a beautiful family. But one accident changed everything. After losing his memory, he vanished and started a new life in poverty, unaware of who he truly was. Now, 20 years later, he's working as a cleaner in a luxury hotel, owned by his own son who doesn't know him. What happens when the truth comes out will leave you in tears. 20 years ago, David Johnson was one of the richest and most respected men in the country. He owned many businesses, hotels, estates, oil companies, and more. People knew him everywhere. Newspapers wrote about his wealth and success. On TV, people called him the Golden Boss. He had a beautiful wife named Clara and 2 children, Daniel and Melissa. They lived in a mansion with a private chef, drivers, guards, and everything money could buy. David was not just rich, he was also kind. He gave to the poor, supported orphanages, and paid for the education of children who couldn't afford school. Many people looked up to him. But one rainy night, everything changed. He was returning home after a business trip to a faraway village. One of the days he traveled by himself without escorts. The road was wet and slippery. As he turned into a narrow bend, a truck lost control and hit his car. The crash was loud and deadly. His car flipped twice and landed in a ditch. By the time help came, he was barely breathing. David was taken to a small hospital in that remote village. He was in a coma for days. When he finally woke up, he had no idea who he was. He couldn't remember his name, family, or even the accident. He looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. The hospital had no idea who he was either. He had no phone, no ID, and the car was too damaged to trace anything. Meanwhile, his wife Clara searched everywhere. She reported to the police, went on radio and TV, printed flyers, and even hired private investigators. But no one could find him. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Eventually, the world thought David was dead. Clara was broken. She mourned with her children and tried to move on, even though her heart still hoped he was alive. Back in the village, the man without a name was simply called John by the nurses. When he was discharged, he had nowhere to go. He walked from town to town, begging for food, doing small jobs, cleaning gutters, carrying loads, washing plates, just to survive. One day, he met a woman named Grace in a village market. She was selling tomatoes and onions. She noticed the tired man sleeping under a tree with nothing to eat. She gave him a little food. The next day, he helped her carry her goods to the market. And just like that, a friendship began. Grace was a widow. Her husband had died of illness, and she was raising their son, Michael, all alone. John became a helper. He was gentle, hard-working, and honest. He had no memory of his past, but he had a kind heart. After some time, Grace and John got married. They had 2 more children, and their family grew to 5. Life was hard, but they were together. Years passed. John worked every day, doing whatever job he could find: farm labor, street cleaning, fetching water for people. But the money was never enough. Sometimes they ate once a day. Their clothes were old, and their children couldn't go to good schools. Grace stayed strong and always encouraged him. But in his heart, John always felt like something was missing. One afternoon, he heard people talking about a 5-star hotel that just opened in the city of Kingsway. They were hiring cleaners and paying good money. He didn't want to go at first. He didn't like the idea of being far from his family, but Grace encouraged him. "This could be a big chance for us," she said. "If you get the job, we can pay school fees, buy food, and maybe one day build our own house." John nodded. The next day, he traveled to Kingsway. The hotel was like nothing he had ever seen. Shining floors, crystal chandeliers, smartly dressed people walking in and out. It was called Regal Heights Grand Hotel. John applied, and after a few questions, he was hired. But the job was not easy. The hotel owner was a 22-year-old billionaire named Kelvin Daniels. He had inherited his father's wealth and expanded it quickly. But Kelvin was proud, rude, and spoiled. He shouted at his workers, threw things at them, and fired people without reason. "Do I pay you to stand around?" he yelled on John's first day. "Move faster, or get out." John bowed and said softly, "Yes, sir. I'll do better." Every day, Kelvin insulted the staff. He looked down on everyone, especially the older workers. "You're too slow, old man," he said to John once. "You should be cleaning toilets, not floors." John held his anger and cleaned quietly. He needed this job. He had a wife and 3 children waiting for him. He couldn't lose it. Each evening, he returned home to their small one-room apartment. His clothes were dusty, his back ached, and his eyes were tired. He would sit down, and Grace would bring him a bowl of gari or yam. "That boy is impossible," John would say. "Today," he shouted because I mopped the floor twice. "He said I was wasting water." Grace would take his hand and say, "Please endure it. We need this job. We're all counting on you." Sometimes their children would come to him and hug him. "Papa, don't worry," said his son Michael. "One day, I'll become a lawyer and fight for people like you." John would smile weakly. "I believe you, son." But inside, he was slowly breaking. One day at the hotel, Kelvin announced a big party for VIP guests. "Everyone must be perfect that day," he shouted. "If you mess up, you're fired." John worked hard that morning, arranging chairs, wiping tables, polishing the floors. As he was wiping a mirror in the hallway, he saw a woman walk past. She looked elegant, dressed in black. Something about her made him freeze. She looked familiar, painfully familiar. His heart began to beat fast. His hands shook. He dropped the towel and stared. "Who is that woman?" he whispered to a cleaner beside him. "That's Mrs. Clara Johnson," the woman replied. "They say she lost her husband 20 years ago. He was a billionaire. She never married again. He's the mother of our boss." John felt dizzy. His vision blurred. A strange pain ran through his head. He saw flashes, himself holding a little girl, a woman smiling at him, a big house, a golden ring. He sat on a stool and held his head. I know that woman," he whispered. "But how?" The memories were still hidden, but something inside was waking up. John could not sleep that night. He sat on the wooden bench outside his small house, looking up at the stars. His heart was heavy. His mind was confused. All he could see was the woman from the hotel, the elegant woman in the black dress with sad eyes. The moment he saw her, something inside him shook. A flash of memory. A blurry face. A home. A voice calling his name. David. He didn't understand it, but it felt like he knew her. "Who is she?" he whispered to himself. Inside the house, Grace was feeding their youngest child. She noticed how quiet John was. "What's wrong?" she asked gently, walking out to sit beside him. He shook his head slowly. "I saw a woman today at work. Something about her felt very familiar. Like I've seen her before. A long time ago." Grace touched his shoulder. "Maybe she reminds you of someone from your forgotten past?" John looked at her. "Yes. But this was different. I felt something deep inside. Like a door trying to open in my head." Grace nodded, though she felt uneasy. She had always known John had a life before her. But now it felt like that life was calling him back. 2 days later, there was an important announcement at the hotel. All staff members, both senior and junior, were to gather in the meeting hall by 10 a.m. sharp. Kelvin, the young billionaire owner, had something important to say. The workers whispered among themselves. Meetings with Kelvin were rare, and when they happened, they usually didn't end well. John was nervous but curious. He cleaned his tools early that morning and dressed in his cleanest uniform. Maybe, just maybe, Kelvin would be in a better mood this time. By 9:45 a.m., the staff started entering the meeting hall. The cleaners, receptionists, kitchen workers, security guards, all were there. Suddenly, the grand doors opened, and in walked the same woman John had seen before. The woman who had haunted his thoughts for days. Clara. She walked in with grace and confidence. She wore a royal blue dress and a necklace made of pearls. Her face was calm, but her eyes looked tired, like someone who had carried sadness for a long time. John's heart skipped again. It's her, he thought. I know her. I know I do. But Clara didn't notice him. She didn't even glance in his direction. She walked straight to the front and sat beside her son, Kelvin. John froze. He's truly Kelvin's mother. His mind raced. How could the woman he remembered be the mother of the arrogant young man who insulted him every day? He took a step toward the hall, ready to enter and sit with the other workers. But before he could take another step, Kelvin's sharp voice stopped him. Hey, old man. John turned around slowly. Yes, sir. Why are you walking into the meeting hall like you're important? Kelvin snapped. Go to my office and clean it. I want it shining before I return. But sir, John said quietly, I thought we were all invited to the staff meeting? Kelvin rolled his eyes. Did I ask for your opinion? That meeting is for real staff, not floor mobbers. You don't need to be there. Go and do your job. John looked down and nodded. Yes, sir. As he walked away, Clara turned slightly toward the sound of her son's voice. For just a moment, her eyes brushed past John's figure. But she didn't recognize him. Not in the dirty uniform, not with the gray hair and tired face. To her, he was just another cleaner in the background. John entered Kelvin's office with a heavy heart. He picked up the mop and began to clean slowly. The room was already clean, but he went over it again. He dusted the shelves, wiped the table, and polished the glass windows. All the while, his mind kept returning to Clara. Why did she feel so familiar? Why did her face bring pain and peace at the same time? An hour later, the meeting ended. Clara stood and left with her personal assistant. Kelvin came into the office not long after. He looked around and frowned immediately. What's this nonsense? He barked. Didn't I tell you to make this place shine? Are you blind? There's still dust on this table. John stepped forward. Sir, I cleaned the table twice. Maybe you touched it when you came in. Are you calling me a liar? Kelvin shouted. No, sir, John said, lowering his head. Kelvin's face turned red with anger. Without warning, he raised his hand and slapped John hard across the face. John stumbled back. His leg caught on the mop bucket. He slipped, hit his head on the edge of the table, and fell hard to the floor. There was silence for a moment. Get up, Kelvin said coldly. But John didn't move. His body lay still on the ground. His eyes were closed. A small line of blood trickled from his head. Hey! Kelvin shouted again, now slightly panicked. I said get up. One of the staff members who had just returned to get her bag saw the scene and screamed, Someone help! He's not moving. Within minutes, hotel security and workers gathered. An ambulance was called. John was rushed to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctors checked him. His breathing was shallow. They ran tests. The results came back. He was in a coma. Grace was called later that day. She arrived at the hospital with tears in her eyes and her children beside her. She held John's hand and whispered, Please wake up. Please don't leave us. Back at the hotel, Clara heard what had happened. She was shocked and furious. Kelvin! She shouted when she saw her son. You slapped an old man so hard he collapsed. What is wrong with you? He was disrespectful. Kelvin said stubbornly. He is still a human being, Clara snapped. How could you do such a thing? Clara sat in her room later that night, troubled. Something about the cleaner's face, the way he walked, the way he spoke. She closed her eyes and tried to remember. Then, like a small spark in the dark, an old memory returned. A voice. A smile. A man calling her, my Clara. She opened her eyes quickly, heart beating fast. Could it be? She shook her head. No. That man was gone. Dead. Gone for 20 years. Wasn't he? The hospital room was quiet. Machines beeped softly. A gentle breeze came through the open window. John, who was once David Johnson, a powerful billionaire, lay still on the hospital bed. His head was bandaged, his face pale, his breathing slow. He had been in a coma since the slap and fall the day before. No one knew if he would wake up. Grace sat by his side, holding his hand. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Their children were waiting outside with a nurse. She wiped her eyes with the edge of her wrapper. "Please wake up, my husband," she whispered. "Please don't leave us. I need you. The children need you." She had not slept all night. Her eyes were swollen. Her heart was heavy. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. That morning, Clara stood by her window at home, staring into the sky. She couldn't stop thinking about the man who collapsed in her son's office. There was something about his face, something too familiar to ignore. All night, memories had danced through her mind. The way he walked, the tone of his voice, even the way his hands looked, it reminded her of him. Her husband, David. Her beloved David, who vanished 20 years ago without a trace. The man she had cried for, prayed for, searched for. The man she never stopped missing. "It can't be," she whispered to herself. "Can it?" She quickly grabbed her bag and called her driver. "Take me to the hospital. I need to see someone. Now." At the hospital, Grace was still seated beside John when the door opened. She looked up and saw a tall, elegant woman in a designer dress walk into the room. The woman paused at the door, staring at the man on the bed. It was Clara. She stepped slowly into the room. At first, she didn't speak. Her eyes were locked on his face. She moved closer, her hands shaking. And then, she gasped. Her mouth opened, and her eyes widened in shock. "David," she whispered. Grace looked confused. "Excuse me." Clara dropped her bag and rushed to the side of the bed. She stared at his face, his mouth, the shape of his nose. She saw a small scar above his right eyebrow, the same scar David had from a fall when he was 20. "Oh my God," she said, covering her mouth. Tears rushed into her eyes. "It's him. It's my husband. This is David Johnson." She fell on her knees beside the bed and began to cry loudly. "David, my David, where have you been? Why do you look like this? Oh my God." Grace sat frozen in her chair. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her hands began to tremble. What is she saying? She looked at the woman hugging her husband, and calling him by another name. Her heart began to race. Then the door burst open again. It was Kelvin. He stepped into the room, looking annoyed. "Mom, what are you doing? Why did you leave the house so suddenly?" He stopped when he saw her hugging the old man. What is this? Why are you hugging this dirty cleaner?" he asked sharply. Clara stood up slowly, her eyes red with tears. She turned to face her son. "This man," she said softly, "is your father." Kelvin blinked. He looked at the man on the bed, then back at his mother. He laughed nervously. "Wait, what are you talking about? My father died 20 years ago." Clara nodded, wiping her tears. "We thought he was dead. He went missing after a car accident. We searched everywhere. We even did a funeral ceremony when we lost hope. But I never truly believed he was gone. And now, here he is." She walked closer to Kelvin and took his hand. "Kelvin, this man is your real father. Look at him carefully. Don't you see it?" Kelvin stared at the man on the bed. He squinted. He tried to see past the dirty clothes, the tired face, the bandages. And then, his eyes widened. The shape of the face, the jawline, the scar above the eyebrow, the hands, The feeling. No, no, no. Kelvin stepped back slowly, shaking his head. It can't be. This man. This poor, old man. He's my father. Clara nodded. Yes. This is David Johnson. Your father. My husband. Kelvin looked at the floor, silent. A wave of confusion swept through his chest. He remembered the photos on the wall at home. The man in the suits, smiling beside Clara. The man who once held him as a baby. It was him. Kelvin turned away and leaned against the wall. How is this possible? How could my father become this? Grace was still sitting down, her eyes filled with tears, her body frozen. She couldn't speak. She couldn't understand what was happening. Her husband, a billionaire? She had lived with him for years. They had 3 children together. He was gentle, poor, hard-working, but she never knew he once lived in a mansion, owned companies, and had another family. She looked at the woman crying over the same man she had married and started a life with. She didn't know what to do. She didn't even know what to think. The room was silent. Only the soft beeping of the heart monitor broke the air. John, still in coma, knew nothing of what was happening around him. But the truth had finally come out. The poor cleaner was a lost billionaire. And now, 2 women sat at his bedside. 2 families. 1 truth. John lay in the hospital bed, still and silent. Days had passed since the accident. The doctors said he was stable, but unconscious. His brain had taken a strong hit. They couldn't say when, or if, he would wake up. Clara came to the hospital every morning and sat by his side. She brought fresh flowers, cleaned his hands with warm water, and spoke softly to him. David, it's me. Clara, your wife. Please wake up. We're here. Your son is here. Your life is waiting for you. Grace came too, but always sat at the corner of the room, quietly. Her eyes were tired, her heart broken. She didn't know what to say, or where she stood anymore. She had loved him with her whole heart, even without knowing who he truly was. Kelvin, the proud billionaire, had changed since the truth came out. He no longer shouted at the staff. He stopped being rude. The man he once insulted, slapped, and humiliated turned out to be his own father. He felt shame every time he saw him lying helpless in that bed. I can't believe I treated my own father that way, Kelvin said quietly one evening. Then, one quiet afternoon, something happened. Clara was sitting by his bed, holding his hand. Grace was about to stand up and leave for the day when John's fingers moved. Clara gasped. Doctor! Nurse! She shouted. He moved. I saw his hand move. The nurses came rushing in. The doctor followed quickly. They checked his eyes, his breathing, and his heartbeat. Then slowly, his eyelids fluttered. His eyes opened. At first, they were dull, confused. He blinked several times. Mr. Johnson, the doctor said, can you hear me? John looked around, his eyes darting from the ceiling to the faces in the room. He opened his mouth slowly. Where am I? You're in the hospital, the doctor replied with a smile. You've been in a coma. But you're awake now. You're safe. John turned his head. And then he saw her. Clara. She was holding his hand with tears in her eyes. He stared at her face for a long time. Then, the memories began to rush in. The accident. The mansion. The company. The car crash. Clara. Daniel. Melissa. Kelvin. His heart pounded. He gasped softly. Clara. He whispered. Clara smiled, her eyes now full of tears. Yes. It's me, David. You're back. John slowly sat up with help from the nurse. He looked at her closely, then touched her face. You waited for me? She nodded. I never gave up. He pulled her close and hugged her tightly. Tears flowed freely. Kelvin entered the room at that moment and saw them hugging. He stood silently at the door, unsure of what to say. Clara turned and saw her son. She gently whispered into David's ear, "That's your son. That's Kelvin." David looked up. Kelvin stepped forward slowly. "Dad," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I treated you badly. I said horrible things. I even—" He lowered his head in shame. "I'm sorry." David looked at the young man who once insulted him daily. He remembered the pain, the anger. But now, looking at him through the eyes of a father, he felt something else, forgiveness. He reached out his hand. Kelvin took it and dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry, Dad." "I forgive you," David said gently. "You didn't know." They hugged quietly, father and son, for the first time in 20 years. But in the corner of the room, Grace was already walking toward the door, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't want to disturb the moment. She knew it was time to go. She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "I should leave," she whispered. "You have your life back now." But before she could open the door, David's voice called out, "Grace." She turned around, startled. He was looking at her now, his eyes filled with a mix of love, confusion, and pain. You stayed with me all these years. You took care of me. You loved me, even when I didn't know who I was." Grace nodded, wiping her tears. "I only did what a wife would do, even if I didn't know you were a billionaire." David smiled softly. "And that's why I'll never forget you." Weeks passed. David fully recovered. He went home, but not just to the house he once knew. He returned to his old mansion, where everything had been left the same for 20 years. Old pictures of him still hung on the wall. His books were still in the shelf. His suits were still in the closet. Clara stood by his side, holding his hand. But David didn't forget Grace. One day, he drove to the small house where she lived with the children. He sat down with her under the mango tree in front of the house. "You gave me a second chance at life," he said. "You gave me love when I had nothing. You deserve more." Grace looked down. "You belong with your real family." "I understand." David shook his head. "You're part of my family too now." And just like that, he built a beautiful mansion for Grace and the children. It wasn't too far from his own house, so he could visit often. The children were sent to the best schools. Michael, the eldest, smiled brightly when he saw his new room with a bookshelf and computer. "I never imagined this," Grace said one day, standing in her new kitchen. "I never even dreamed this kind of life." David smiled. "You deserve it all." The two families began to connect. Clara and Grace didn't become best friends, but they respected each other. Clara even told Grace one day, "Thank you for keeping him alive, for loving him when I couldn't." Grace smiled kindly. "He's a good man. That's why." Kelvin, now humbled, became a better boss. He took his father's advice and started treating the hotel staff with kindness. He even gave promotions to many workers. The mansion was filled with laughter again. A man who once forgot who he was had now found everything: his past, his present, and a future filled with love, peace, and purpose.